your main man, coming back with another campaign builder video. And in this video, what I'm going to talk about is politics. Now, in your fantasy campaign, there should be a massive amount of politics interwoven into the background, into the backdrop of many different stories and in many different plots of your game. This will also give you a good framework for which to tell your stories that may only in the very slightest way be indirectly linked to the political structures. Now, there are two main sorts of politics for this video that I'm going to talk about, the internal and the external. Now, in internal, I'm talking about the politics of regions, of cities, of races. Now, in external, I'm talking about the politics between nations, between races, between vastly different nations in the game. Politics can also be applied to deities. Really, what we're going to look at first in politics is relationships, because politics in our world, as in a fantasy world, start with relationships. Now, the relationships are very important to determine. Think about not only your primary race, perhaps in the majority of published Dungeons and Dragons settings, the majority race are humans. Now, humans might not be the majority race in your game, but we, being humans, it's very easy to make them dominant, to project ideas onto them, to build them up more so than others, to make more kinds of humans, more factions of humans, more importance around humans. But make sure you don't forget to go with the other races. Maybe, you have a race of apes with man-like intelligence, and these man-like intelligently apes, maybe you go way back into the history, and they had horrendous wars against the serpent people of great arcane lore. And these wars go into place. Perhaps the serpent people were enslaved by apes with man-like intelligence and then rose up into a grand revolution and hunted them and killed them off to a vast large number, to where now there are only a few apes with man-like intelligence. And the majority of apes are just normal jabroni apes that are out there eating ants and stuff, but some with man-like intelligence are still there roaming through the cities and so forth as a lesser, nearly exterminated race, and the serpent people are still hot on their heels for that racial vengeance from ages past, perhaps even to an age predating the dominant races of perhaps humans and elves in your game. With this political interweave, you begin to add additional aspects and elements to history. History is a very daunting topic, but when you integrate all these various pieces where you have little tiny bits of history, it starts to build itself a good framework, and you go in there, going to sprinkle in some additional ideas after that. But you're going to have that. So now we have a political framework for those nations. Where did the nation of serpent people come from? Why are they so angry and oppressed? Why do they have a nation that's all about slaves now? And how does that temper the views of their leaders, of these serpent people? How are they going to interact with the rest of the world? Well, perhaps these serpent people do not trust other races. They are aggressive. They are warlike. They take offense to slights quite easily, because at their heart they are a slave culture. They are afraid of being enslaved, of being eradicated, of being made subservient to others, to being used as stepping stones. So the serpent people are perhaps have very poor relationships with others, or perhaps that's not the case. Perhaps they have very strong relationships with others. Perhaps the elves came to their aid and helped to liberate, or a great elven hero whose name you come up with helped deliver the serpent people from the bondage of apes with man-like intelligence. Because damn, if you don't need an elf to help you get away from some apes with man-like intelligence, you better have somebody on your side to give the hot tag to. Believe that with your mind. So now that you begin to establish that, the relationships between races, and how does that come into perhaps a nation that's predominantly elven? And you might want to spice that up. Well, wow, see, the serpent folk and the elves, racially, they're friends. So now we have maybe a 10% minority inside a particular elven nation. You should have more than one elven nation, not the nation of elves. No, give it a name. Give them gods that they favor, and perhaps another elven nation over here. Same elves. We're not talking about something drastic like dark elves or something like that. Same kind of elves over here, but maybe maybe each of them have 3 dominant gods, and only one of those gods is the same. So they have some difference in the gods they worship. There's a difference in the culture, and then they begin to get those slights. Maybe they have a great relationship, but maybe they don't. You add some tension in there, You don't build those good political relationships. You don't have them with the same sort of worldview. You know, and it's like I said, it's about politics really come down to relationships as a basis, and then worldview. How can you interlock? You know, are your nations capable of trading? And that really comes down to the other aspect. Do you have anything that I want? That's sort of the full picture there on politics. And if you do have something that someone wants, damned if you might not be able to have peace if you can provide it to them in a way that is more effective for you and them than them coming and attempting to take it from you via war or just rolling into your house at night and grabbing things. So, you know, begin to think about all of those aspects, and geography can really become a major factor in politics. If there's just things are too far away or there's too big of issues in terms of running water or massive mountain ranges, tremendous amounts of monsters or other predators that are in between these nations, their political relationships may not necessarily need to be that highly developed in the game in terms of these nations just aren't able to do much with one another. Not that you don't want to examine that and come up with reasons. So when designing that, also look at the internal. You have your predominant nation here. We're still going to say of elves. Now we already have a 10% minority population of serpent people here. Then you add a few other random creatures in there. Perhaps they have 3% in that particular city of Elfheim, of 3% of ogres. Or they have some ogres that live there with the serpent people, and you have these various elven groups, these political factions. Some of them more conservative in their ideology, some of them more liberal in their ideology, some of them more lenient, some of them perhaps more tyrannical. You have various political factors, whether you have a royal set here or not, and you start really adding into the depth and development of that city, then you want to go back and think about the different sorts of political groups that you can have. You know, and in a fantasy game, you can have way more in a political range. Over here, you may have a democracy, and the next kingdom over may be run by royal blood going all the way back to the very first person that was forged by that god, and that family line continuing on. The next kingdom over may be run by wizards, because wizards just rolled up on a kingdom and just started lighting it up, and they got up in there and they took it over and they began to build it up and use magic all over the place. So you've been to take it in there and develop a culture really built around magic, magical defenses. Maybe they don't even really have much in the way of soldiers, but if an army starts approaching, you know, that army's going to have the problem of fireball, lightning bolt, skeet storm, and every other horrible magical bombardment that they can launch out against those people, and they may be very difficult to access tactically because of the vast number of magical spells that have been put around the area for defensive. Hell, the city may even be flying, or some other really strange idea like a mast. Maybe it's the same level, but you have a tremendous moat around it. It's like a half a mile in all directions. It just looks like a giant hole was scooped out, and then this city was put back in it, and the mages have something that flies them across when they want to get in and out of the city, almost like a little taxi service. And then you go into how their views are going to affect their politics. Well, these are probably very intelligent people because they're wizards. They're probably very conservative-minded. They're intelligent. You know, they're well-read, and they study. They're also not going to have that sort of pedigree, that royal lineage, that idea. They're going to very likely lean towards a high meritocracy in terms of, well, yeah, this guy was very helpful yesterday, but what can you do for me today? How can you continue to prove your position and to prove your purpose and to earn your accolades and status, as opposed to simply being born into a position and being given the credence that you're going to be given in a royalty. And in that mageocracy, you know, you can look at the factors vying. You're going to have that one. You can have councils, but you may have that one position of power, that throne, and how everyone works to subvert politically. And then there's forces from outside, and how, while the kingdom of elves and serpentmen might be the horrible enemy to the mageocracy, they may find an ally inside the mageocracy and attempt to influence that individual, either corrupting them Well, and then they begin to play against each other, and there's all these politics, bringing armies in, bringing that force of war to enforce their political positions. So it's really again about developing out your NPCs, about developing these people at the high points, the very important sorts of individuals that might not be individuals that are going to be in a high level of spotlight in terms of being used as NPCs on the stage of your game. These may well be riggers, cameramen, the backdrop of the game. Though they do hold important positions, they themselves may not get much, if any, screen time ever. Another great political idea to look at are guild houses. The Hunters Guild, the Hoarders Guild, Bakers Guild, the Ranchers Guild, the Farmers Guild, all these guilds, unions essentially. And how do they influence politics? How do they bring it, particularly if you have a system where you have senators or a king or a council or a majorcracy? They still have to deal with these important people because these people have lots of gold and silver and copper, and they have to be given some degree of a voice when you begin to have that sort of merchant society, which is very, very prevalent in a Dungeons and Dragons game. And, when you can go into politics, also think about how the politics affect the people. Are they in a lawful evil totalitarian position where they're being oppressed? Are they in a very light lawful evil society where maybe the people are quite happy because they're emerging from a tremendous chaotic neutral sort of regime, and now they actually have order and they have jobs, and while people are being killed, they aren't just randomly being subjugated to being beaten senseless and having their stuff taken by anyone who happens to be stronger than them, so that you have that sort of social contract in place, albeit a harsh one. Perhaps it's much preferred by the people. So in a political sense, you can also think about what is the common man, does they Rose feel about this baby? So how does that person on the street view this? And of course, you're going to have varying opinions there, but it's going to give you a great sense of putting it into the game and making it real. When the players can actually come in there and look at and see, okay, how are the peasants reacting? How are the paupers reacting? How are the merchants? Is this thriving? Is this government working? Is the government in control? Does it firmly have control over the people? Is that really, what a government needs to do? It needs to have a control so it doesn't just tip over, And there's, again, a lot of different times, and more than I can go into in the scope of a video, different sorts of politics you can have. You could have a region that's actually ruled by a god. The king is a god, or maybe the king is openly ruling as a dragon or a vampire or some a lich or some other really high-end supernatural creature. Hell, the king, you could be run by a queen who is a gorgon. I don't like to use the word Medusa for her, that's a proper name, but you get what I'm saying. She looks at you and you turn to stone, but she wears a veil. She's very intelligent, political. The people, maybe they're happy to have her there. And you can really tell an interesting story with that when the people are quite pleased because of, perhaps it's what we, with our modern eye, would look at as a bad situation, but the situations that they have come out of before were so much worse. You're like, okay, yeah, Gorgon's our queen, but we get to eat now, and eating is awesome. I would have like 8 kids, but 5 of them starved to death with our regime before this. My 3 kids now, they eat. Look at this one, he's fat. And all of a sudden you got to remember these, and if you're running a Dark Ages style of game, the fact that your kids haven't starved to death might just mean your government is awesome. It's not the modern day, and it is very easy to look at it with our modern sensibilities and, is this shit fucked up? That's not the way you really want to look at a campaign in those sort of styles, because people really, in your typical fantasy style campaign, probably don't have much of anything. They may not own anything. They may essentially be almost slaves surfing on the land, with some raggedy clothes that are practically falling off them, and rib bones sticking out and rickets, because they just don't have anything. So if someone else comes along and offers them more, they're going to like that. But look at those heads of these countries. How do these different countries get along? How is their politics? What is the above board? What are the people saying? What is the court saying? And what is the real deal between the individuals that are the kings and the queens, the senators and so forth, and who are the figures behind the throne manipulating it? Once you start getting a beat on that, and then design what do these people want, the politics all begin to fall in place. If you have a kingdom A over here, and you design the figurehead leader wants this, the power behind the throne wants this, the populace wants this, the major players like the guilds, and perhaps even you have a small senate with some power, wants this. Now you go to this kingdom, this kingdom, this kingdom, this kingdom, and they want their own things, and you start having that spiderweb interplay, and look at the resources that a kingdom has. Do they have a lot of food that can be grown there? Do they have a lot of gold? Do they have a lot of silver? Do they have gems? Do they have lumber? Do they have easy access to water? Do they have lots of skilled people to make wheels and barrels and horseshoes? Do they have horses? What are the resources that they have? What are the resources that they want? How does that build up trading relationships? How does that build up war relationships? How does that build up the demand for tribute? And once you start putting those aspects together, you're going to have a very cohesive, believable political web. And it should look, by the time you're done, like a spider web, because there should be probably a few hundred, your world over, at least a few hundred people that you develop to enough degree where you have at least here they want this, here they want this, here they want this, here they want this. And that can be kind of simple. It doesn't have to take a tremendous amount of time. Think about the wants, what they don't have, what they want to have, and how do they go about getting it? Do they do it peacefully? Do they do it, through trade? Are they a nation that's set upon and beat down? And what are the politics within there? Who's bucking to get that position of the throne, and what outside nations might come against them? Who has had wars in the past? What nations are particularly against someone? There are a certain race or certain races that they'll execute on sight. Or there are certain classes, say like a wizard, for example, like, oh, well, if a wizard comes here, we're going to lash you to a stake and burn you alive. And that's going to send a message to have no more wizards coming in here. And how does that begin to affect things? And you start building up that history, you add to that web, you really make things pop and come alive.